Great. Hi, everyone. Oh, let's see. Oh, do I need the mic as well? Or this one's okay? This will project it. Can you guys hear me in the back? Oh, wonderful. Great. Wonderful. Great. Just barely? Yeah. Well, you're a little quiet. I'm a little quiet. Okay. Let me channel my inner Mariah Carey. That's better. No, I know. It's better for hard of hearing folks to have the mic, right? Yes. And my buddy Chuck, yeah, we want to make sure we can see that. So thank you again to the Ventura County Cultural Heritage Board and the Ventura County Resources Management Agency for inviting me to come and speak today about Asian American and Pacific Islanders in Ventura County. In particular, I want to thank Dylan Murray, the associate planner who's here, who just planted a couple seeds last year, and those seeds are now sprouting, and we're here today, and I get to chat with you guys about this important topic. I'm going to put the mic here and maybe not move around so much, so 1 second. Okay, there we go. Great. So a few things. We're going to have, I hope I can get you guys to chat and talk a little bit today what your thoughts are, too, as far as how we're thinking about space and place. Let's see, I'm not used to a PC because I usually am on a Mac, but I'm going to do my best, I promise. You suddenly lose your abilities after you are on a Mac for too long. So what I wanted to do was just kind of do a little overview of Asian American migration, and then talk a little bit about the mixture of our communities, and including Polynesians, mostly Native Hawaiians and Samoans who came to Ventura County. And then I want to save some time for Q&A. So I promise I won't use all the slides that I have here. But some of the things I wanted all of us to think about kind of initially is thinking about why learning about this topic is important to understanding California and then even understanding Ventura County's history. Sometimes we just learn a default history and we never question why there's other histories that are not a part of that default narrative. And so I really applaud the Cultural Heritage Board's vision in thinking about including underrepresented voices. Also, too, one of the things I'd like for you guys to think about, just because, you know, we have the privilege of living in the present, and we look at the past with sort of rose-colored lenses and nostalgia. And I think when we think about the past, we assume things were great, they worked really hard, they helped us, you know, they were pioneers of a community. But I also think it's important that we think about strategies for how they, in particular Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, built community here. Because what are, just to kind of ask you guys in some ways, right? How do people, I'm going to skip to I had a little timeline, but I'll go to that in a second here. Oh no, hold on. Sorry, I have to use the mouse. All right. We have this long timeline of long history, right? And at some point, and I thought about this as I was coming here today, and I thought, I could do a whole entire class on local Asian American history. So I might be doing that next year or in the coming year through Cal State Channel Islands, and I'll tell you guys about that later. But anyway, what I think about for long-term kind of timelines and histories is that we've had lots and lots of different communities here in this area. And I won't read all of this, but I think these are just some of the greatest hits, you know, of some of the important timelines of our county. But some of the things that, you know, we don't often get to share and talk about is the communities who were not in the majority, and who were in much smaller number, but still doing a lot of good work to help build the economy, build the spaces and the structures that we have here. And to go into that, I wanted to just share a few communities. I won't be able to talk about all of these, but I just want folks to think about that. Within AAPI, these are the kind of the major groups, and what we see in terms of national narratives of immigration to the United States, these communities are tracking exactly the way in which the national narrative is tracking when we look at just Ventura County. So the first groups to arrive are the Chinese, and then later the Japanese follow, the Filipinos after that, and then we see in smaller, much smaller number, Native Hawaiians, Samoans, Korean Americans, and then a handful of South Asians, and then we see a lot of people, particularly after 1965 and after the Vietnam War, we see more Southeast Asians, South Asians, and then another wave of Chinese immigrants as well. So these are folks who are building community, contributing to labor, owning businesses, and one kind of thing that I want you guys to think about too, and I am a professor, so I have to quiz my students, and you guys are way more engaged than the people that come to my class in the first place. So I wanted to just share just a question. So, and I want you guys to sort of think about this too. So what might be indicators of community building? What, and building is the word here that you want to think about. But what are the indicators of community building in early migrant communities? What are the kind of things that we see? Or even if you have no idea and you're just here for funsies, what would you guess as to what that might be? What are some indicators? Yes, and will you tell us your name?
Barbara Davies.
Barbara, yeah.
Down from Santa Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
So,
yeah.
Well, commerce.
Business, right? They're opening businesses.
Usually, you want to eat a taste of home. And so
restaurants?
Restaurants, but also small market gardens to produce extra vegetables or foods to sell in early farmers market type things.
So we're thinking, so Barbara said, I'm just repeating, so Barbara said commerce, indicators or representatives of food stuffs that they had formerly had in their ancestral homelands. So if we think about that in terms of a place, what that would be grocery stores, right? Dry goods stores. What other kinds of things do communities build as they are developing? Yes, and will you tell us your name? Adrian, yeah. Houses of worship, yes, absolutely. You build churches and temples because that's part of what you do as a community, right? And then that's where you gotta put baptismal records and marriage records and death records, and you put and some you gotta congregate in some way, right? What are other spaces that we do? I love this. You guys have great interaction here. And what is your name?
My name is Don.
Don. Okay, yes.
Close proximity of housing.
Housing, right? You gotta live somewhere. So we've got housing, and then let's say you're a migrant workforce, you can't build your own house, you maybe can't buy your own house, but you're okay to rent or maybe live in a boarding house. And so these are the kinds of things that we're seeing in the early communities are boarding houses. Also, as we saw with that was my hint. Oh, I forgot to share the hint here. The hint is, what did they do? What spaces do they create? So absolutely, stores, churches, religious houses of worship, homes, right? And maybe I'll take one more, then we'll go on. Yeah. Does anybody? Let's see. Anybody who has an answer? Yeah. What? Can you tell us your name?
Farming.
Farming. Absolutely. So farming for labor, for food, and to prepare the kinds of things that they need, or working for others for wages. So as we start to look at, and I may have to skip a couple slides because I could talk about this for hours, but I know we're limited today because you guys have to, you have to go back to your jobs. But this is my job. But so as we look at what has really controlled the community and what has limited the community and the capacity of these early Asian American communities include a lot of legislation that prevented them from entering the United States or prevented certain kinds of people from entering the United States. And so one of the things that is really very markedly different from the early Chinese American community and to the lesser extent to after 1965 is that Chinese Americans had come to initially work on the railroad and then moved from mining and the railroad into the cities, into Chinatowns, and established themselves in cities. San Buenaventura was considered a rural Chinatown, and I got pictures of that to show you guys here in a second. But what we see is a lot of men and very, very few women. I believe it was in the 1880 or 1890 census. I have to go back to that slide in a second. But there was something like 126 men to 4 women in Ventura. So if we think about it, it's really a bachelor society. And so there's a lot of, the vibe is different. You have to, you work hard and you play hard. So there were billiards halls and saloons and barbershops and gambling dens because you got to do stuff in your free time. And so by 1882, the United States had decided that we didn't want any more Chinese entering the United States, and that really restricts the Chinese population to a trickle. Very few are coming. Some who are already here were able to go back and forth. And so there's a labor vacuum. Who comes? We still have labor to do, right? And so next, Japanese immigrants start to come initially to Hawaii and then to the United States mainland, mostly to California. And as they come, there's this growing anti-Japanese sentiment that had initially been an anti-Chinese sentiment that were then kind of placed on the Japanese. And so by 1907, 1908, the Japanese government had interacted with the US government and decided on self-restricting who would be able to leave Japan to go to the United States. And so what we have is just primarily Japanese, not Japanese laborers coming any longer, but Japanese middle-class people with a little bit of wealth, people who can open up a business, people who had completed higher levels of education, people who weren't going to be a burden on our society. And so they come to this agreement. The Chinese didn't have this option, and so they get completely excluded. And then as a result of this, and Japanese too, it's mostly men, because of the gentleman's agreement, the men who were already here figured, well, it's either now or never. We got to get hitched, we got to get married, and they start to bring over picture brides. And so how many of you guys have heard of picture brides? The picture bride story? Yes, it's cinematic, it's great. A lot of these women ended up coming, marrying men they'd never seen before, and relying on a picture that wasn't necessarily accurate, because the men would powder their faces, take pictures of themselves in front of houses and cars and horses that they did not own, and then send this off to these young women who were 10 to 15 years younger, and they're already here and then they can't turn back. So it wasn't as cinematic and romantic as we want to assume it to be, but nonetheless, they came and they actually settled. And so what we see nationally as well as in Ventura County is the Japanese American community forming families. And that's really different because you have couples and you have children, and then you have American-born children who now have U.S. citizenship. And that's a game changer for Asian immigrants, because prior to that, they were not allowed to naturalize and become citizens. And aliens who were not citizens couldn't own land, and that's what the Alien Land Act's about there too. I just put this extra stuff on here because for a lot of folks who really want to hear a lot about legislation. The next one I'll just show you just so I can contextualize the Filipino American community includes Filipinos coming after the Japanese kind of got restricted from coming. And because the Philippines was a U.S. territory, they were considered to be U.S. nationals, and they could continue to enter the United States, even though there were all these other immigration restrictions upon other communities. So Filipinos come in, and then by the mid-1930s, we're done, no more Filipinos. They're not considered nationals any longer, and then they now have a quota, and their immigration gets reduced. I share this because it's not an accident that we see the timing of Chinese, then Japanese, then Filipinos. It's all part of a lot of legislation that really funneled and decided who got to come and who didn't get to come to the United States. And of course, the other two pieces of legislation, Executive Order 9066, that essentially put all people of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast into incarceration camps during World War II. And that really emptied out the Japantown that was really thriving in Oxnard. And that's a big deal because you have a community who's now in its maybe fourth decade, finally getting their bearings, and then they got to go. And that really just, again, sets a tremendous precedent for the post-war era where Japanese didn't come back in large number, and it really just emptied out not just Oxnard's Japantown, and in Japantown I mean several blocks of an area, but the entire West Coast. And then 1965 we changed our Immigration Act to allow more 20,000 people per country per year to enter the United States. I got to give you guys this history lesson because I promise I'm going to come back to this because now I can make reference to this stuff and you'll know what I'm talking about. This is just, that's what we do. So I want to share, I'm going to skip, I have to skip and jump through a couple slides because I want to make sure that we can get to more Q&A. So I'm skipping. You guys are going to see this a little later. As we look, and this is kind of just what I mentioned earlier, Asian Americans in Ventura County just really followed the national patterns of arrival from arriving to restriction to then different groups of folks coming. And then what's interesting, particularly about Filipinos, is that despite the fact that they initially came as laborers to work in our agricultural fields, they also joined the Navy in the Philippines. And then after World War II, we have two prominent military bases in the county that we see lots of Filipinos now coming through the county and then eventually retiring even in Ventura County too. And now we have a seafood city, so that's great. No, that's a sign of success, right? Because it's stores it's food, it's all that stuff. That's an indicator of a very healthy ethnic enclave. So I know that we're not just talking about Seafood City. We're going to talk, and I'm giving them a shout out because you guys got to go to the deli section if you haven't done that yet. Okay, I'm going to skip this because we're going to skip. I have a couple quiz questions for you guys because, I got to keep you on your toes and everyone's paying attention. None of you guys are on your phones looking down like the people that I usually talk to. I teach college students. So a quick quiz. So you can raise your hand and you can tell me and guess what are the main crops in Ventura County, past and present. What do we say?
Past lima beans, now strawberries, lemons.
She's got all the answers.
Avocados, celery, yeah. Oh, geez.
She said it all. She won the prize. No, right. And then really early on too, lima beans. We were lima bean capital, right? And sugar beets, of course. We have so many. And of course, hold on. Strawberries. Almost forgot. That's the picture there of, one of the strawberry farms locally. We have so many. Right. We had so many opportunities for labor that included being connected to the land. And so when I initially began to do the research for a lot of the communities here, in particular the Asian American communities, I went to the Museum of Ventura County, and I have to give a shout out to Hannah Rogers and the staff at the Museum of Ventura County's research archive. They are fantastic. There's great material there. You just got to dig for it, and I was digging for weeks. Like every Wednesday I'd come in. And we tend to think like, oh yeah, lots of laborers here, and maybe we hear about the sugar beet strikes. But there were lots of early, very Chinese laborers. This is a picture of a Chinese man with a queue. This is the hairstyle that Chinese men had to wear at the time, which was their hair pulled back, shaved in the front, and in a long braid going down their backs. Some people may say, well, why didn't they just acculturate and just cut their hair and sort of westernize, right? Just assimilate. That's what the European immigrants were doing. Well, for many Chinese and many immigrants, including Italian, German, and Irish immigrants, a lot of folks thought they were going to come here, make money, and go home. You don't think you're going to stay here because, number one, your wife and your kids are back home. You're not planning on living out the rest of your life here. And so a lot of them, because they were required by their government to wear their hair like this, they said, I'm going to keep my style, and then when I take my money, I'll go home and I'll be able to just enter back into Chinese society. And so this hairstyle, though, because of its perceived femininity and that kind of nature, a lot of Chinese men were really emasculated, and it's sort of the very beginning of the feminization of Asian American men. Many Chinese men, unfortunately, just, were the recipients of a lot of this anti-Asian sentiment. I want to also share pictures of other communities who had also worked in many of Ventura County's fields, including South Asian laborers, and this is in a lima bean field. This is, I think, the one photo that I've seen of South Asian laborers here, and they're out in Somas. And I love this photo because I just think like whoever came by set up a camera and said, let's take a picture of you guys. And we've just captured this moment. What we do know about a lot of these early laborers is a lot of them worked in ethnic-specific labor groups. They were often recruited together as compatriots to work. There'd be a kind of a coordinator or a group. For the Chinese community, it was the Tongs. For the Japanese community, it was prefectural associations. And there would be a recruiter who would say, there's work to do, you guys come along. And a lot of people knew each other. And so there's a real sense of community already even before coming. And as people migrated with the seasons and with the agriculture, they moved to different labor camps. And this is a picture of Filipino laborers at the Arneal Ranch. I also want to point out, I have some sources to share too, but I'll just do a plug. Eleanor Tayag, who is a former librarian at Cal State Channel Islands, did one of those wonderful sepia-toned Images of America books called Filipinos in Ventura County, and this image is the cover image. And so you guys are welcome to take a look at the books that I've brought after. So to keep on moving, I wanted to show you guys and talk a little bit about the communities and the spaces. I'm going to skip a couple slides here, and oops, sorry. I know, I wish I could talk about this forever, but we have time limits, so here we are. But this is a picture of Ventura's Chinatown. This is, I know that for those of you guys who recognize the mission, this is looking north, and this was the Chinatown that had existed right on what is now the paved area and continues on to be Figueroa Street. I forget the year of this, but initially, the first Chinese immigrants who came to Ventura County came in about 1865. And by 1870, Chinese in the state of California were about 50,000 people and making up about 8% of California's population. Because Ventura County was a rural enclave in comparison to the larger urban Chinatowns like Los Angeles or San Francisco, this was, Ventura's Chinatown was a space for really the local Chinese population. It wasn't a place where tourists went, as we think about Chinatowns today. They had, as you guys guessed, or not guessed, you had educated answers about what they did, and they had dry goods stores, lodging, places for people to also enjoy gambling as well. The other thing that I want to share, and I don't mean to make it to kind of essentialize the community, but this is a hand-drawn map of the Chinatown, except this is this is Main Street on this side, so I couldn't orient it so it's north-south. I like cardinal directions, but this is what I had to do. Here's Main Street. This is Figueroa, and so what we were looking at was the view, kind of looking that way, towards Main Street on that side. And so you'll see here, I know my vision is changing too, so it's hard to read some small text, but we have here, it says opium, it says barn, it says store, yards. We see a lot of this. There's the Tong, the Bingtong Association, which was essentially like the unemployment office, if you will. That was where folks went and got, news about jobs. But I also want to make a point to say too that these ideas about, gambling or smoking or doing these quote unquote illicit activities, this was really amplified in the media. Remember, this is also an era this is the Victorian era where there's lots of very strict ideals about morality. And, Chinese folks, they did get arrested for, because you're not supposed to gamble, you're not supposed to have opium. But nonetheless, it was more normalized, I want to say, because it wasn't gambling in the sense that it's sort of a game, if you think about it, like a game of chance or cards, or if we think about, a poker game, right? Something lighter than the sinister idea of that they were all degenerate, and it isn't that sort of sentiment. And I think we have to realize that it was just, again, a part of what you do when there's not a lot of other activities to do outside of work, right? This is a community that is primarily a very young bachelor society. The Chinese American community in Ventura average age was by 1900 was around 26 or 27 years old, so fairly young, and really trying to build their community. By 1900, though, things change a little bit, and what we're seeing is that where's our mouse here? There we go, put that there. A lot of the Chinese actually, as the city of Oxnard now has more work opportunities with the sugar beet fields, more Chinese from Hueneme, from Ventura as well, they end up coming to Oxnard and establishing themselves in what is called the China Alley in Oxnard. And for folks who know Oxnard's geography, this is on Saviors Road between 5th and 6th Street. So this is a small kind of block. It's not a town, right? A China, we think, ooh, Chinatown, and it's really just a couple of blocks, but they did what they could. This is in 1926. What we know is that by 1898, most of, again, those Chinese American restaurateurs, labor bosses, and merchants all kind of congregate into Oxnard, and then they build this new China Alley. And part of it is that they're now, you got to think, these business owners need to serve it, right? Provide services for the workers who are working in the sugar beet fields, thinning out that important source of sugar for the rest of the country, because we suddenly had a new habit of, wanting sugar on everything. I am now gonna skip a whole bunch of slides, so apologies. If this was on my computer, I could swipe through all of them really quickly, but for the sake of time, right? We want to make sure we get to questions. So I'm going to go really, really fast. Don't look, close your eyes. Sorry, I could talk about this forever. This is one of my favorite topics. I got to tell you, it's so fascinating and exciting because it's like right here. It's all of these spaces. FYI, fun fact: when they did the archaeology for the the Chinatown in Ventura, because after the community was, we relocated and then those buildings were torn down, they had actually found game pieces in the ground, buried, and the white pieces were the most popular, and they were blue pieces as well. But there was a lot of these little small white pieces that were from a lot of the games that they had played. And so you think too, right? It's not just their legacy, but it is, again, it really does show that even when the physical buildings are no longer there, the presence of that community still really does exist. I also think too, when we think about cultural preservation, you think, oh, those important historic homes, oh, they're so cool. Aren't we so glad we saved them from from getting destroyed? And, if you're wealthy and you own a lot of land, you have a lot more power to be able to protect some of those spaces and pass down your property to descendants, right? But if you're a Chinese worker, you can't bring a wife, you don't have kids here, you can't buy land, you don't have a house, your space is something that's rented, but does it make it less important as a housing dwelling, right? No, it's just as important, I think. But those are the spaces that get torn down, and we don't necessarily have that built environment any longer. But I think what we do have is a lot of stories and a lot of the archaeological evidence as well as historic evidence that can help us pull together some of these narratives to say, these were really important spaces, even if it was just a snapshot. And as we look at Oxnard, and I'm going to kind of turn to Oxnard because this is definitely a space where there was a lot of interracial interaction. You have to cooperate if you live by people, right? You just can't be you guys know, you have good neighbors and you have neighbors that are maybe not your favorite. I'm trying to use more positive language in my tone. So you got to think, you got to get along with folks, and they're your neighbors, they're there. People are actually more helpful than you think, despite the fact that there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment, anti-Asian sentiment in the early 20th century. But what we know is that there's a lot of coalition building because these were areas where there were these very, very clear ethnic enclaves, from the China Alley to the Japanese Business District, which I'll show you in a second, and then what was also called Little Sonora, which had primarily Mexican immigrants who were also working in the fields alongside Japanese laborers and other Asian American laborers. How many of you guys have heard of the 1903 Oxnard sugar beet strike? Yes, we have some folks who know about this. Okay, great. If you have not heard of this, I was in graduate school the first time I had heard about this strike, and in 1903, Japanese laborers partnered with Mexican laborers to build a very, very early, very, very fragile labor association. So they were trying to unionize. These are people from different countries who spoke different languages, but they worked side by side in the field, and they started to recognize that they weren't being paid as much as other workers. And so with their limited capacity to communicate, they actually built this, what was later called the JMLA, and they won their strike, and they got better working conditions, better wages. What we know in the historic record, and my colleague Jose Alamillo at Cal State Channel Islands and Frank Barajas, also at Cal State Channel Islands, they've written on this strike, and it's significant because it's one of the first interethnic strikes. It was a successful strike, and it was also here in Ventura County. Like, we should be super proud of this. The first time I heard about this, I was shocked that I had never learned this, but you realize we can only learn so much in our history classes. And so you got to go out and search for more and find out more things, and I will share a bunch of sources with you guys too. And I have a QR code you'll be able to download a Google Doc that has a bunch of sources, so I promise I'll share. But what we know about this Oxnard sugar beet strike is that they actually created a logo. Isn't this cool? They created a logo. So just want to share, I know I have props today. This is an artist's rendition of the JMLA logo. It had the Japanese flag as kind of the sun, and then the field at the bottom, and a tan hand and a not so tan hand holding, kind of holding each other's hands together across this this landscape. And this is, we actually don't have, so far in the historic record, we don't have an actual image of the, here, hold it up a little higher. We don't have an actual image of the logo, but based on what we've garnered from what's been written about the logo, this is what we believe it may look like. So Jose Alamillo was able to get an artist to recreate this and then kind of create this logo. So I wanted to just share that with you guys. This is a closer version, let's see, there's a closer picture, a bigger one for the video, there you go. But yes, this is artist inspiration of that logo. But how cool is that? We still need to do more research because we haven't done research on using Japanese records. So we've looked at a lot of Spanish language and English language records, but next is to look at the Spanish or Japanese language records. I want to show as well a couple other things here too. I know today we're talking a lot about the Chinese community because I think it's one of the earliest and one of the ones that's really left a long legacy. For folks who have maybe heard of or maybe gone to Mama Suhu's Orient, has anybody heard of this restaurant? Okay, some folks have. Oh, wonderful. So this is on Oxnard Boulevard, right at the corner of, now I'm forgetting, 7th? 8th. 8th, I think it's 8th. Yes, 8th Street. I might have gotten that wrong, so please don't get me in trouble for that. So, but what we know is Mama Suhu, this was a really early, one of the early migrants from China to the United States, and the Suhu family had initially settled in Ventura and then eventually made their way to Oxnard. And what's really neat, today it is not an operating restaurant. This is what the restaurant looks like. Back in its heyday, this is what it looked like. And inside, in fact, for restaurant goers, there were these murals on the wall. And so this is actually a picture, a very recent photo of those murals today, and hopefully this might be something that preservationists around here might be able to do and protect. But there's photos of, which I wasn't able to include in today's presentation, of tables and patrons at the Chinese restaurant enjoying their dinners, and you see the mural in its, right alongside of a lot of those tables. The Suhu family later, Mama Suhu and several others, she and her family are, their kids are Americans, and her son, Bill Suhu, he serves during World War II in the U.S. military and comes back to Oxnard, and he's a veteran, and wants to buy a house. And in the neighborhood where he wants to purchase that house, I believe it was on Deodore Avenue, his neighbors did not want him to move in. And he just felt, here he was, an American citizen of Chinese descent. He's a veteran of our, and he's part of the greatest generation. And he can't buy a house. This is one of the things that many, many veterans had enjoyed in the post-war period with the GI Bill, and he felt that this slight was just something that was, he couldn't let that go, and he began to participate in Oxnard City Council and was eventually elected to be the mayor of Oxnard. And I believe of the research that is known, I believe he's one of the very first Chinese American mayors elected to a city council post as mayor. So it is really powerful. In 1966, he's elected. And then even later, Oxnard has a very long legacy of coalition building, again, because there's not that many Chinese and there's not that many Asian Americans. And you have to realize it's not just the Chinese American community voting for him. He's building coalitions to get lots of folks to elect him. In the 1980s, we also know that Nao Takasugi and Tsujio Kato, also Japanese American from local families, are also elected as mayor of Oxnard. So it is really, there's something to say about the kinds of cooperation that had existed within Ventura County and in Oxnard. One other place I want to talk about before we switch to Q&A, is that okay, Dylan? Yeah, okay. Is I had way more that I wanted to share, but here we are. I might finish with the cemetery because it's one of the historic landmarks of our county. This is the historic Japanese cemetery in Oxnard. If you're familiar with Oxnard, it is on Pleasant Valley Road and Edding Road near Ocean View Junior High School, near where you get onto the PCH, kind of in that area. And the Japanese American community, as they had developed their prominence in Oxnard, you know, very early part of the century, there's no vaccines, there's high infant mortality rates. I think in the country it was about 15%, pretty high. You know, kids didn't survive because of lots of reasons. And this was, there's a family who had lost their young child, Akiko Tagami, and she's not quite even 2 years old yet. And this is part of this long legacy of the need for not just houses and places to eat and places to purchase, you know, to go shopping, but also that you need spaces where you got to bury your deceased. And the Wainimi Masonic Association had a cemetery out, then this is way out away from the city center. The Wainimi Masonic Cemetery is just beyond those eucalyptus trees back there. And when the Japanese American community started to have a need for burying their deceased from 1908 on, the Masons said, sure, we'll let you bury your, you know, you can bury your community members here, but not with us, on a separate cemetery, on a separate lot that's sandier. And you also, well, we didn't realize this until we started looking at the receipt book, but if in order to be buried in the Masonic cemetery, people would pay $5. And that was a lot of money back then. In order to be buried in the Japanese cemetery, they were charged $25. So that's a significant amount of money for a laborer and for a working class family. And so it was segregated by race, and also segregated in a way where it was a financial burden to actually be buried in this cemetery. And the Japanese, I'm going to show you guys a more recent photo of the cemetery. This is what it looks like today, more recently. So this was, I forget what year we took this photo, maybe 2018, I believe. But the Wainimi, this historic Japanese cemetery, from my research, it is one of the only known segregated Asian cemeteries in the United States. And by segregated, people will say, oh, well, there's a Japanese cemetery in Colma, and there's the Chinese section of, you know, certain cemeteries in, you know, pick a city, and we've got that. But this one, and really because of the receipt books and because of the way in which there's really physical segregation between where the Masons buried their deceased and where the Japanese were buried, it has significance in that regard. It's also our county landmark, number 18, and it's got a wonderful story. I will not be able to give you all the details today, but if you look on History Pin, I've put some more details about the cemetery on a site called History Pin. If you search the Japanese cemetery, it'll come up. The burials started in the back and then moved all the way to the front. I think you guys can, you can see my mouse, yes. And so these were the last burials in 1960. That was the last time that cemetery had been open for burials. And what's fascinating too is that there were about 120 Japanese who were buried here, a lot of little kids. There's a lot of fascinating stories about family dynamics. One in particular, the Nakai family, and they are right around here where these headstones are to the left. The Nakai family, as I was doing my research, I found that there were 4 members of the Nakai family that were buried there, the parents and then 2 sons. And I thought, that's really strange. All of them died within about 3 to 4 years of each other. And I thought, this has got to be a communicable disease. The way that the descendants have described it, they said, our uncle was always kept away from us in the attic because he was sick. And so I'm guessing it was probably tuberculosis. I'm also not with certainty, but likely a communicable disease that then affected the rest of the family. The 4 family members died by 1935, leaving 2 young girls, one age 6 and one age 9. What do? Your parents are gone, your brothers are gone, you don't have family nearby, right? You got your 2 little girls left. Suzuko and Aiko Nakai are left. That's the 2 girls. And a community member by the name of Shisaku Shimizu, he steps in, and he was friends with the parents. and he ends up kind of watching over the girls, and he was a bachelor, and he passes away in 1940, so right before World War II, right before the Japanese American community is incarcerated and they're moved out of Oxnard. And the Nakai girls, they go on to Gila River to the incarceration camp there. They have families and they move away from Oxnard, but they always came back to put flowers on their parents, their parents' grave, because that's what you do, right? You move back and you take care of family business. But they also always came and cleaned Shisaku Shimizu's grave too. And he, again, he was a bachelor and he took really good care of the girls. And Aiko and Shizuko then told their kids, every time you go see Grandma and Grandpa at the Wainimi Cemetery, make sure you go clean Shisaku Shimizu's grave. And then they told their grandkids. And so it is an 80-year-old story of care for 5 years of taking care of these 2 orphan girls. And the descendants have shared that story with the Japanese American community here in Ventura County. And we, in the JCL, the Japanese American Citizens League members, we have done annual cleanups of the cemetery, and we now know the story, and we share this story, and now you know this story. So if you guys ever go to the cemetery, you'll see these 2 headstones together, and you realize, that the community wasn't just, working in the sugar beet fields. They weren't just trying to bust their, working extra hard in creating this Japantown that was really tough to make. But they also had really tremendous community connections that included this really lovely story of care at a time where it was really difficult to do so. I want to share one last picture, and then we'll go to Q&A. Is that okay, Dylan? I know I keep saying I'm going to stop, but I can't stop. And you guys, right? It's so fun. So again, sorry, got to skip a couple slides because this is Asahi Market. How many of you guys have heard of Asahi Market? Yes. Okay, if you haven't, it's still open. Different owners, though. Yeah, the family, it changed hands. But Asahi Market was a place, it was a dry goods store, but it was also, if you see, it says contractor. You got horse parking here. This is on Oxnard Boulevard on the eastern side of Oxnard Boulevard at 7th Street and Savior, or is it Savior's? 7th, Oxnard Boulevard, yeah. Sorry, what was it? Oxnard Boulevard, yeah, because Savior's is before 5 Points. Okay, sorry, I had a little moment here. But Asahi Market was a place where people learned about where to find jobs, and this was the Takasugi family's store that they were able to keep throughout from when it opened and even into today. This business still exists because of a lot of the hard work of the community, but also because of other members who helped retain and keep this building in the hands of good people during World War II. This is what we think is what we're sort of calling the Japanese Business District, looking north on Oxnard Boulevard. This is the eastern side of Oxnard Boulevard, and this is, I believe, like 7th Street right behind me. And so all of these are Japanese businesses. Down here is also Otani's. Now the Otani family has Otani Seafood, now moved to a very different building, but all of these were Japanese businesses thriving as they were really trying to put their roots down in Ventura County. By the eve of World War II, there were almost 500 Japanese living in Oxnard at the time. This is a picture here of, next slide here is the one of the Takasugi family in front of Asahi Market there. And then this is the future mayor of Oxnard, now Takasugi. Isn't that cool? How cool is that? You think, wow. And it's changed hands quite a bit, but I'm going to finish with one, because I think some of these buildings, this is so fascinating. I'm going to share one more, promise, this is Asahi Market over the years, but I'll share one more story of cooperation, and then we'll switch to Q&A. That's what it kind of looked like. This was a little bit older. This was, and then now it's changed hands one more time. Just, I believe, a couple years ago it has changed hands. But I want to share this last story of cooperation, just because I think, again, when we think about these buildings and these spaces, community matters. Community really matters. This is, on the left is Ignacio Carmona, also known as Nacho Carmona, and then now Takasugi. So during World War II, as I mentioned, the Japanese American community had to be relocated to incarceration camps in the interior. Most of the people here in Ventura County went to Gila River, Arizona, which is one of the only Native American reservation that housed an internment camp. So think about that. A population that had been pushed to a reservation now has to take on all 10,000 Japanese prisoners for the duration of the war. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. But during the incarceration, Asahi Market needed to, somebody had to pay the property taxes and the bills, and the Takasugi family gave Nacho Carmona their keys to the store and said, can you take care of it till we get back? We don't know when we're coming back because the war is going on and we don't know when the war is going to end, and thank you so much. And so he did that very thing. He paid the mortgage, paid the property tax, stocked the store, kept it open, added new things on the shelves because, that's what you do. You got to sell your goods. And then when the Takasugis came back, he gave them back the keys. And that was part of the reason why they were able to keep this business, because most of the other businesses just, either they sold it or they didn't have this kind of relationship. And, Asahi Market is here today partially because of a lot of the hard work of, yes, the Takasugis, but also Nacho Carmona. And it just really illustrates that a place like Ventura County has so much more overlap of cooperation, not in a kumbaya kind of way, because, people didn't always get along, but there was this sense of community, and you were a good neighbor and you took care of your neighbors. And I think this really illustrates what our community can do even during really tough times. So I'm going to stop here, but I want to just say thank you very much, everybody, for your attention and your time and letting me talk your ears off today. So thank you again. Thank you. Great. And we can take some questions if you'd like. Yeah, happy to do that. If anybody has questions, yeah, or thoughts, yeah.
It's a curiosity question.
Sure.
You couldn't afford to be buried because there's so much. Where were you buried? Where would you be buried if you couldn't afford to be buried?
That's a great question. Yeah, I know that. So in 1908, the Ivy Lawn Cemetery hadn't been opened yet. The Santa Clara the cemetery was really for Catholics, and there is one Japanese Catholic buried at the cemetery that I saw. She'd changed her name to Maria, and it's kind of interesting, and I wanted to research that a little bit more. But yeah, where would they be buried? That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, but I think that most people knew that was the cemetery to go to, because if you remember, I think from the St. Francis Dam disaster, there were 2 Japanese who had perished, and they lived out in I believe it was in Santa Paula or Fillmore, and one or two of them were buried in the Japanese cemetery in Oxnard. So I think people in the area knew, oh, that's the Japanese cemetery. That's where you would bury your deceased if you're from that community. Yeah. So great question. Yes. Oh, wait. Any other? Yes.
My name is Don. Did the Asian minorities associate much with the other minorities, the Latino or American Indian, or?
Yes, good question. So because the Japanese community was a lot smaller, and they essentially kind of went from farm worker to then owning farms and then trying to own businesses, and because of that gentleman's agreement, the Japanese immigrants who came after 1908 had capital. They were able to kind of jumpstart and begin owning businesses. So they were a very small minority who now were a little bit more powerful, if you think about it, right? They've got a business. And what I do know, according to interviews with many descendants from the cemetery, is that particularly those who had stores that catered to Spanish-speaking clientele, primarily from Mexico, they would learn Spanish. And one man who his grandfather is buried in the Japanese cemetery, he said, my grandmother, who was married to his grandfather, she's from Japan. She spoke Japanese, but I couldn't speak to her because I'm third generation. I don't speak Japanese. He said, but she spoke Spanish, but I didn't speak Spanish either. And I thought, wait a minute, what? Your grandma from Japan speaks Spanish? And he's like, yeah, because she kind of skipped English because it wasn't really useful. She just went straight to Spanish because that was the clientele that she ended up, interacting with the most. So her, this is the Maya-Yama family. And I thought that is fascinating. She just didn't bother with English. So you think about it like that the community was so embedded in really trying to get a good sense of making sure that their patrons of their stores were happy and that they could communicate with them. Another man by the name of Kumanosuke Inadomi. Kumanosuke is a very Japanese man, it's a Japanese man's name. And people can't pronounce Kumanosuke. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. And so he lived in Santa Paula, and he had a business there. He had a little store there. He changed his name to Manuel. I'm serious. All the documents say M.K., so he took on Manuel as his first name, Manuel Kumanosuke Inadomi. It all says M.K. Inadomi. If you look him up on the Oxnard newspaper, the historic newspapers, M.K. Inadomi, M.K. Inadomi, and Manuel Inadomi. And I thought, at first I saw this, I thought, wait a minute, how's his name Manuel? And, turns out that was just what worked out for him, and the folks who came to his store could pronounce his name, So there's a real sense, I think, of really interethnic Japanese and Mexican in particular cooperation, from the Oxnard sugar beet strike to, the Carmonas and the Takasugis to many, many other examples. So, because they work together, they live together. Everybody has good food, so. Yeah. Other questions? Or comments? Any comments? Any thoughts? Oops, sorry. Thoughts? Oh, I wanted to and now I'm going to share you guys share some resources with you guys. So give me a second. I have to scroll all the way down. I apologize. I was really ambitious in thinking I was going to get through a lot of these slides. So I'm going to go way to the very end. So, or maybe what I'll do is I'll just stop and move. Yeah, I had like 100 slides. I wasn't going to go through all of them, but I figured just in case, you never know, you have to be extra prepared. So this is, okay. This is what I want to share with you guys from the current slide. So there are several resources for many of you guys who want to learn more. There are 3, these are, I think, one of the really excellent resources. I'm going to give you guys a QR code on the next slide to be able to download a Google Doc that has the names of these sources. But one's from the Journal of Ventura County, or of Ventura County History, and the Museum of Ventura County's journal called the Ventura County Historical Society Quarterly, and then Eli Tayag's book, Filipinos in Ventura County. So I have, and there's one other really rare one. This is available at the Oxnard Public Library, but it's called Hidden Lives, A Century of Chinese American History in Ventura County, and it's got a lot of those really great images. But the next slide is a QR code that I have double-checked to make sure the link works. And so it's, if you have a smartphone, you can use your smartphone to capture the link. If you would like a copy of the link, I'll give you my email address and I can just send it to you too. But it's got a resource list of Asian American and Pacific Islander communities here, as well as the digital copies to these journals. So you are armed with everything you need if you are really into learning about local history. I may also propose a local history course too later, but I'll let you guys know. But with that, I want to stop here and say thank you very much. Thank you.